As part of our Adult Gap Year series, we are talking today with Charles. Charles took his family on a trip around the world. He is now speaking on stages all about his experience and what it meant to him and his family to take that pause. He shares so many insights. If you have ever considered doing a large trip with your family, this episode is definitely for you. Take a listen. Welcome to the Gap Year Podcast, where we explore the who, what, where, when, and why of gap years. It's real people sharing their stories, ideas, and experts diving deep into how you can make the right decisions in order to have a meaningful gap year. This is the place to be no matter where you are on your gap year journey. I'm Michelle Dittmer, your resident gap year expert. Let's jump right in. Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Gap Year Podcast. My name is Michelle Dittmer, and I am your host and Gap Year expert. Today, we have the lovely Charles here with us to have a conversation all about his family gap year experience. And we are going to dive so deep into this that you're just going to get all of the details that you need in this episode. So, Charles, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Michelle. Thank you very much for having me.
Amazing. So why don't you give us like the 30,000 foot view? Who are you? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? And we'll get to the gap year stuff in a little bit. But who are you? What are you all about right now?
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Charles Achampong. I am a husband, a father of two young girls, and someone who's really, I would say in my mind, very much kind of mid-journey at this point in time and not anywhere close to the finish line. I spent the last 20 plus years working in the public, private, not-for-profit, and philanthropic sectors, mostly focused on helping organizations and communities solving complex problems, really looking at being able to take people who are on the margins and sort of the lower socioeconomic areas of their life and giving them opportunities to succeed, whether it be through education or through philanthropic investments, that type of thing. And these days I speak and write about something that I don't think I fully really understood until recently. And it was really focused on how pausing can change the way that we lead, the way that we live, the way that we connect. And a lot of that comes from, our decision as a family to be able to take a step off the treadmill and for a year and see really what would happen if we started sort of stopped optimizing our life and just kind of started actually enjoying it and living it as well.
Now you're talking my language. All
Yeah.
the intentional pauses, right?
Yes, very much so.
Well, and I think it's so interesting that I've been in the youth space talking about this for so long, and now there's more conversations around the other points in life where pushing pause makes sense. And it's still scary, maybe even more so scarier because we
Mhm.
have more responsibilities. I always laugh. Sometimes I say gap years are wasted on the young. Uh,
True. Very
maybe
true.
when you look back at your kids going and doing these things, you're like, oh, if I could do that right now, these are all the
Yes.
things I would do, and this is how I would take advantage of it. But we also have all of these responsibilities and
Yes.
these things that can feel like barriers
Hmm.
to it. So where did your inspiration come from? What
Mm.
ignited this idea that, hey, there's an opportunity here? It goes against everything that society tells me I should be doing at this stage.
Yes.
So what was that impetus for starting the thinking and the planning for your gap year?
Yeah, great question. I think for like all good ideas that have happened in my life, they've came from my spouse, Janice. And so I think back, this is almost 15, 20 years ago. We were on our honeymoon and I remember we had climbed or kind of made our way up to the peak of the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro. Twinkling nights down below, it was dusk, evening, and she said to me, I would really love to be able to take our future family on a trip around the world. Now you have to understand, like, we had just got married, we had just bought a house, we had just started our careers in Toronto, we had just moved in together, all that stuff. So all these just things that have happened, and this was the last thing. We didn't even decided how many kids that we were going to have, or what, all those things, right? So these are all things that she was very much like, no, 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 no. I see all these young families. I want to experience that, and of course, for me, I humored her. I'm like, okay, sure, we can look at doing this. Once I kind of got over that initial, what is she thinking kind of mentality, but it was her really putting together the seed, saying that, we can put a plan in place. This can be our 10-year plan. And it's hard because we all live in this kind of short-term mentality of wanting things now. Which, let's put together this 10-year plan. We'll continue to enjoy and live our life as we see fit. We'll make sacrifices along the way of the things that we don't need to invest in. And let's decide to use our savings and put it towards this big trip around the world. And it was initially going to be maybe an initial sort of spending time on an African safari to celebrate her 40th birthday down the road. But as time went on, as the pandemic happened, we just realized that life is short. So let's see if we can do something that would be adventurous and courageous, and something that would really kind of propel us and think differently about our own kind of experiences and our own kind of life. And so we pulled the plug a couple of years ago, and we took our kids on an absolutely amazing trip around the world. And I would say that, you know, I underestimated how much fun and how much enjoyment and how enriching the experience is going to be for us. Now that I look back, but I'm forever grateful for the fact that if it wasn't for her idea planting the seed, there's no way that we would have done this.
Well, and I think it's so interesting because everybody's on a different timeline when it comes
Mm,
to the adult gap year world. So for some people, they kind of get hurled into it. Maybe they got laid off and they have a package.
mm-hmm.
And there's kind of an opportunistic piece about being able to do something that is unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
And there are folks who have shorter planned programs within their organization. If they have a sabbatical program, or in education, they often have deferred payment plans where you can do 4/5 in education. So you got like a shorter timeline, but you had this or maybe your wife had this vision
Yes.
really far down the line. And I think that any timeline works. It doesn't matter
Yes.
if you are starting
Exactly.
tomorrow or you're starting 15 years from now, but that having that seed, that inspiration and this vision also kind of kickstarts that planning process, whether that's financial planning or logistical planning or
Mm-hmm.
educational planning, all of these things. There's so many things that go into it. What would you say were the biggest barriers that you came across? Because this is not a path that is easiest one to
No.
take. And
No.
lots of people will throw things in the way. So what were some of the biggest things that got in the way for you?
Yeah, I think you touched on a few of them. One was that financial fear, right? Not just the we can we afford this, but what are we going to give up as a result of it as well? We had to kind of shift from what I call kind of the scarcity mindset to more of this values based kind of decision making, right? So, what is this year worth to us from that perspective? So, there's the financial fear that's there, and I think that's there for everybody, whether or not this is the right investment that you should be making for the time that you're making it as well. Then, of course, there's logistics and control that you touched on. It was the schooling, it was work, it was the travel routes, it was everything can feel very overwhelming very quickly. But most of this stuff is very solvable, right? Particularly because of the fact that you're not doing this for you're not the only one who has done this, and there are other people before you who can do this, who have done this, and so you can always look to other resources that are there. So it didn't feel like we were at the beginning of this kind of experience as well. Um, I think the other piece is really like one that we all go through is this illusion of readiness, right? You think you need to have everything figured out before you can go, and honestly, there's a lot of the stuff that we kind of figured out along the way and made kind of pivots and changes, as we needed as well. There's no kind of clean moment, I feel, where life pauses so that you can say, now we can go, right? You kind of have to interrupt it yourself and decide to pursue it on your own. So I think that was one piece too. Um, the piece for me was about letting go of my identity, right? And so this one kind of surprised me a bit. It's kind of stepping away from work, from the titles, from the corner office, from the carrots that you get, the productivity we talked about earlier, right? You realize how much of your identity is really tied to being quote unquote useful, right? In a very specific way. So I think that was another thing that I had to kind of let go of too. And I think the other piece is really the execution reality. It's the fact that it's not all rainbows and unicorns. It's not all magical, right? There were some hard days. There was some fatigue. Actually, there was a lot of fatigue. There was the sibling arguments. There was the missed flights. There was the crankiness. I think, but that's for me. That's where the excitement is. That's where the growth is, and you don't get to benefit without a bit of friction. And so I think overall, those are some of the things that I look back in hindsight, and those are some of the biggest barriers to kind of experiencing what we went through as part of our trip around the world.
Yeah, I think I want to kind of underscore a couple things that you said.
Mm.
First of all, the idea of readiness. People
Mm-hmm.
say about like getting married or having kids, like this is the same
Exactly.
monumental life experience. You're never going to be ready to have kids. You're
Yep.
never going to be ready to buy a house. Like these are just things that you have to jump with both feet. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that is such an important message for people who are listening and watching to hear is that you aren't going to be have a perfect scenario. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing is ever going to line up exactly right for everything to fall into place. And I think you said that so beautifully. And then the other thing that I want to, for maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on,
Yeah.
is this idea of values-based decision making.
Mm.
Because I think my parents always told me like money is how we show we value something by how much is it worth, and we have this almost made up currency when you think about it. It's a piece of paper. It's something that flies through the air magically between banks, and it doesn't really exist as a thing, but certain things we value at $1,000, certain things we value at $1. But when we talk about values decision making, sometimes that gets confused with financial decision making. So, talk to me a little bit more
Yeah.
about values-based decision making and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, because it's a fancy phrase without giving so a bit more detail. So I mean, one of the biggest shifts I think for me was realizing that most of the decisions that before the trip were by default decisions were, yeah, really default decisions. They weren't deliberate decisions. So what made sense financially, what looked responsible, what kept things stable and predictable. Like none of those things are bad, right? But I think they're often disconnected from what actually matters to you as an individual. And so the gap year kind of forced us to ask, or at least me in particular, ask different questions, like not what was the most practical choice, but what do we value enough to reorganize our lives around? And I think that was the thing that kind of was like, oh, that was so. For us, we said that we valued time together as a family. My kids are now 9 and 12, the kind of preteen years. And so I know that their relationship with us is going to change and morph as they get older, particularly as they get into their teenage years. So what can we do to spend a bit of quality time with them and continuing to mold them and spend that time with them that we may not necessarily get a chance to enjoy and experience with them down the road, right? And also for us, exposing our kids to life beyond the classroom and what it has to offer was very big for both of us. I was very fortunate that I traveled extensively, not only for work, but I was raised in an environment where travel was the norm. My family was from Ghana in West Africa. So we would venture every couple of years to go and see my grandparents and uncles and cousins and expanded family, extended family. And so my parents felt that that was important to be able to trace back your ancestral roots to see about where you came from. And it was important for my kids to be able to see for them as well that there's a bigger world beyond Toronto. As Toronto is diverse, big city, but there's so much out there. So I wanted them to experience that and be exposed to that, and even to see and expose themselves to what other classrooms around the world were like. Right? We would knock on the door of a school and say, "Hey, this is what we're doing. We're experiencing this. Can we just come in and introduce ourselves?" And every time we did that, people, come on in. Very interesting story. You want to come in? And so it was very interesting to see how my kids would interact and tell the story of our experience and to hear the questions, particularly in South Africa, but the types of questions that the kids would get from other students about the experience that they were going through, right? So I think that was there as well. But I think when we looked at our calendar and how we were spending our time, like those values weren't actually showing up. right? So we said that, but we weren't actually executing or being intentional about the values that we said that we wanted to do, right? Being present and not just productive. So uh, the decision became less about can we afford to take a year off and more about can we afford not to live in alignment with the way that we think actually matters to the work that we're doing, right? So that I think is what we really wanted to do. And so I'm trying to make sure that every time we make a decision, it's aligned to the things that are aligned to our values, what makes sense to us as a family. You know, choosing to stay in routine is a values decision. Choosing stability over certainty is a value-based decision, right? And the difference for us is that we made our decision on what values we wanted to pursue on purpose, letting go of predictability, stepping away from income, pausing career momentum. You know, that's where most people stop, right? Because values start competing with comfort, and comfort, because we're human beings, usually wins. So yeah.
I think that's so powerful. And I'm going to encourage all of the listeners to do an activity with themselves and their family in
Mm,
terms of identifying what their family values are, and what are the things that are truly important. And
mm,
I think it's a disservice that we don't do this enough as
mm,
individuals and as families to sit down and say, well, what is important to us? What are the core values that are going to be our North Star, that are going to guide our decision making, that are going to guide us as an individual and as part of this family unit? So if you have your own family and you're listening, sit down and have a conversation. You can find lists online of personal values, family values. Go through and try and identify what some of your values are. And I'm going to give a part two.
yeah. I was
Oh,
just going to add, I just want to add, Michelle, and you know, it's important that you have everyone chime in and share what their values are. I think that's probably implied and implicit in what you're saying, but the big thing for me is like what I value may not necessarily be what someone else in the family values. So it's always very interesting to hear. We didn't follow through on that exercise, and I think it's a really great suggestion, but it's something that I think everyone should do and provide space for everyone to share what their perspective is and what their values are. Then you'll be surprised about what aligns and what doesn't as well. So yeah.
yeah, I love that. Yeah, and because you are a unit, you are
Mm-hmm.
individuals within a team. And you listening and having those conversations can be so powerful and really can help you connect
Mm-hmm.
with your family on a really, really deep level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure we talk enough about how important those core values are to us and to happiness. Often, when
Mm-hmm.
folks are dissatisfied or unhappy,
Yes.
it's because there's things in their lives that are rubbing up against their values, or their behaviors are not in alignment with what those
Mm,
values are.
mm,
And one of the best exercises that you can do, and you mentioned this a little bit, is once you have your values defined, sit down and look at the last 3 months calendar. How are
yeah.
the actions and the things you are spending your time on in alignment or not with those values? And take your last 3 months credit cards and bank statements. What are
Yeah.
you spending your money on? Because those are the two things that we have that illustrate value, our time and our money. So
Love
if
that.
they are not aligned, what how is that maybe causing some of that dissatisfaction in your life? And what can you do to remedy that? How can you shift how you're spending your time and your money in a way that better aligns with your values and your family
Mhm.
values?
That's great. I love that. I love the credit card piece too. I hadn't thought about that. That's true. It's where you. It's no different than when you're working in an organization and you want to know. I mean, it's one thing to see the strategic plan and the values, et cetera, but when you see where the money is actually invested in, that tells you what the organization values. And it's no different than you as an individual to see where you spend your money. It tells you where do you value the type of financial investment you're making, but also on the calendar side is the time piece, right? So those are two very important exercises. I love that.
Here we go. And so the calendar and the bank statements really, really helpful.
Love
And I'd like to talk about one of the examples that I did when I did this exercise years and years ago. I was spending tons of money on my car. I was paying gas, I was paying
Mm.
insurance, I had to
Mm.
do all these things for my car. And it wasn't that I valued my vehicle. That
Mm,
wasn't, I didn't value my car. It was a
mm.
Toyota Corolla. Like it was just a
Yes.
mechanism. But the thing that was actual of value to me was I valued that freedom and that autonomy.
Mm,
And that was my core value. And so the money that was going into the car gave me that autonomy and
mm,
allowed me to go the places, visit the people, see the things that were important to me. So it's not necessarily look at the physical thing and what is the thing and you value your TV or you value Netflix. No, maybe you value family time, maybe you value artistry, like whatever it is, just
yeah.
sitting and thinking about what those things are can be a really great way to realign and find that happiness. And like you came up with in your decision making, your
Mm.
values-based decision making was we value this for our family. This is the experience we want for our kids and ourselves. And lo and behold, you traveled the world.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that example because it's true. As you say that, it makes me think back on our own experience. And people often ask, like, how did you do it? How did you financially? How were you able to do it? And like many things, I mean, it's basic math, income and expenses, right? So we've been fortunate living in a city like Toronto where life is expensive, but the opportunity from a career perspective is also quite lucrative. But also on the expense side, we had to make conscious decisions around where do we want to spend our time, our money, right? And so we were very conscious about, and there's no right way or wrong way of doing it. This is what worked for us, right? For us, we said, well, we don't want to put our kids in a plethora of different activities. We're going to choose one. And even when we did decide to choose one, it was much later, in terms of, I mean, they're now 9 and 12, but it's only in the last year or two that we actually made a conscious effort to saying, okay, this is the activity you're going to pursue outside of school, right? And we also said, well, okay, well, we've been fortunate enough to find a place in your transit. And so do we actually really need to purchase a vehicle? And so that was another big thing where people are still surprised I've never owned a car, right? We've never owned a car. And so that was a conscious decision that we made as well. So there were things along the way that we had made to say that we are not going to succumb to what everybody else is doing, but we are going to use any savings and put it towards our plan to go on this sabbatical. And trust me, it's hard because you're like, well, what's going to happen down the road? Is this the right use of your funds? Are you actually going to go on the trip? And then COVID happens and you start thinking the world is closed down. Is it ever going to open again? Right. But the corollary to that is that because of the fact that we were both fortunate to be working and at home, we weren't spending as much money. Right. And it just made us all the things that we were spending our money stuff, things on, we didn't actually spend money on, and we weren't able to because we weren't able to go anywhere. So we were able to save and generate additional savings. So it was very interesting to see where the things that we prioritize and what are the things that we thought were important that weren't as important when the pandemic hit. It makes you think and kind of question all that. So I love that exercise of time and money and being able to look back on your calendar and on your credit card statements and assess as to where you're making those investments. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's such a fun and very tangible
Mm-hmm.
activity to do.
Mm-hmm.
And just realigning with what's important to you.
Agreed.
But also on this idea of the what ifs,
Mm,
because we talk about all of these like, well, what if, what if, what if,
mm.
and we can see a lot of reasons not to take this time, but there's also a lot of what ifs that shift us to taking the time now. Because a
Yeah.
lot of people put it off. They say, no, I'm going to save for
Yeah.
retirement. I'm going to do
Yeah.
this later. But I've heard countless stories of people whose health has
Yeah.
deteriorated. They have to take care of a loved one. Their savings have completely disappeared because of the
Yeah.
financial market, like whatever it is. So there are these what ifs that also lean in the favor of taking action now
Yes.
rather than looking to the future. So you can weigh both sides of that scale and with
Mm-hmm.
that readiness conversation, you're never going to be ready. There's never going to be a good time, and the what ifs
Yes.
are going to always balance out.
Definitely. Definitely. That I completely agree. I'm very big on this concept of the power of pausing, and that's where I spend a lot of my time speaking on stages, focusing on this notion that you know pausing in my mind is kind of like a comma in a sentence, right? It gives you an opportunity to breathe, to reflect, to kind of take in what's going on before continuing on with the rest of your sentence. It's not a period, or it's not an exclamation mark, it's not a question mark, it's just a chance to pause before you continue. And to your point, if you don't put the comma in your sentence, and someone is going to do it for you, whether it be a health setback, whether it be challenges on the home front, whether it be changes on the workplace, right? You have to be intentional about where you put your comma in your sentence, right? And so I think that's, for me, is something that I've been much more intentional about, or at least by being intentional, meaning that at least that's my goal, and to strive towards doing that, as opposed to kind of taking a bit of a laissez-faire, we'll see where things go and happen. I'm intentionally trying to figure out where I need to put the comma. And it's never perfect. Something, it's kind of the yin and the yang, right? Sometimes you overcompensate on one, then you have to make up for the other. You go back and forth depending on the period of time that you're in as well. But and then the other piece I would say too is, to your point around, waiting for the perfect time. I mean, we know that, and it's hard. Not that you want to be able to sacrifice your retirement savings. You need to be able to assess it all, make all those decisions that make the most sense to you. But it's this idea of being able to stop waiting for the perfect time, because it does not exist. I could have easily come up with excuses as to why we needed to wait for another year, et cetera, et cetera. It'll always feel inconvenient. And I think for me, that is the point, right? And then the other piece too is that you have to really get honest about what's holding you back, right? Most of the time, it's not logistics. It's just the fear of disruption, right? And anything you can do, people often hear about our story, and they think, well, how am I going to take a year off, going on a trip around the year? It's not about taking the year off, right? It's about being able to start much smaller than you think, right? It doesn't have to be a year. It could be a month. It could be a few weeks, right? Even intentional micro sabbaticals work very well, right? The goal isn't about the duration itself. It's about for us, it was about the disruption in routine. So I think you have to kind of have to do that as well. And I think we talked about this before, but if I were to go back and do it all over again, I think we would have involved our girls in the planning process. So we did in some ways, but we kept it as a surprise for them. And I thought I had to kind of envision rainbows and unicorns and balloons and excitement and confetti, but it was anything but that. They were a bit disappointed that they were involved in the planning process, and my oldest was upset about missing out on her elementary school graduation. So there were all kind of these. I underestimated the preteen angst of all the things that they kind of get drawn to.
A very
right?
easy thing to underestimate.
Very easy, because I'm like, do we not already celebrate your graduation from preschool and kindergarten and everything else that we've graduated from and celebrated, right? But so I think, we found kind of a happy medium of being able to involve them in the process as well. And I think for me, this isn't about necessarily escaping your life, because your life is your life. It's about returning in with, for me, it was about returning with a much more clear perspective, make stronger relationships with my spouse and my kids, and maybe a better understanding for me about what actually matters in my life, particularly as I think about the second half of my life, right? As I'm in my mid 40s, coming up on late 40s, right? So all those things are kind of front of mind for me. Yeah.
And what are some of the other takeaways from the other members of your family? Because you are one person that went on this experience,
True.
but these other three humans, what were some of the
Yes.
things they took away from it?
Oh, so interesting. I think for my kids in particular, I've kind of coined this phrase, failure immunity, right? For them, they have this, and it's not immunity from failure, but it's immunity from the feeling that failure leaves behind, the emotional sting. And for them, when I see the two of them in terms of what they took away, like for me, they have this kind of unabashed sense of wanting to make mistakes, to try things. And my youngest is a bit more like that. My oldest was a bit more risk averse, but I think from the experience of just going and trying things, like everything as trivial and tactical as, here's a bit of change or your pocket money because we're in Thailand, go and purchase X at the market down the street or even around the corner. We'll be sitting there and they'd be haggling with the market vendors. And it was an opportunity for them to actually apply the math that we were focusing on in their book earlier in the week, right? And them coming back and realizing, hey, how come you came back with more change than I did? I'm like, well, it was because she negotiated, all those things. So for me, I think from what they got from was kind of the real world examples and experience of what is happening in the world and being able to apply that. So I think, and this notion of trying things and failing and making mistakes and not letting it affect them. So I think that's what they walked away from, and an appreciation of the fact that they're global citizens and not just it's hard because you kind of go through your usual routine of being, they've returned back to school from spring break and getting back to the routine and all the activity that go with it. But I hope that they have gotten from it, and I think they would agree with me, that they're much more resilient, overused phrase, but much more versatile and much more open to trying things, right? And I think my spouse, what would I say she's gotten from it? I think it really, for us, it reminded her that it's possible to try, it's possible to veer off the treadmill, the hamster wheel, and do things differently, right? And I think she is far more emboldened about wanting to do future trips together like this, whatever they may look like. It may not necessarily be a year, but she's kind of like, wow, we were able to pull that off. There's a sense that we can do more of these things. Yes, the nature of our kids and our relationship with our kids will change and morph as they get older, but there's an opportunity for us to do this more and more. So I think that if anything, she's more happy, I would say, about the fact that our story has given people credible evidence of saying, hey, if these guys down the street can do that, maybe we can also explore doing something similar. So if anything, we've kind of democratized the idea of going on these kind of sabbaticals and made it normal for other people in many ways. So I think that's something that she would probably say. I've heard her say that to other people. I think that's what she would kind of reiterate and state as well.
I love that. And I can say confidently, working with older teenagers every day, the amount of fear, of risk taking,
Mm.
is astronomical, more than any other generation, more than
Huh.
anybody else. And so the gift that you've given your kids
Mm.
is absolutely invaluable.
Mm.
And that ability to take that into the real world and to have the confidence to live in the real world, not just behind the
Yes.
scene, is going to pay dividends for them. And I wish that for every young person that they have the
Mm.
opportunity to feel empowered and
Mm.
to feel that nothing is a life sentence, that those
Yeah.
are
Yes.
growing opportunities. And that is not a universal sentiment
Yeah.
amongst
Yeah.
older teenagers. And it's something that gap years, no matter what stage of life you're in, can provide that safe opportunity to take those risks and to learn that you have the skills to navigate when things aren't going perfectly.
Mm.
And it's just a life skill that just strengthens in everybody who takes gap time, period.
Agreed. Agree. Oh, well said. The life sentence piece too really rings true. I mean, we are far more resilient and far more capable than we give ourselves credit for, and we often kind of sell ourselves short. And I mean, I do it. I've gotten better at it, but there's motions and times when I do it to myself, or and not to make. I don't want to make it seem like this trip was kind of the panacea to all our problems, but it helped, I think, uncover that the example we talked about with the onion and peeling back the layers, right? And it's helped me understand my core much better. And then even with my kids and my spouse's core, and get to know them in a much more personal manner, as opposed to just, I don't want to say transactions, but sometimes we almost felt like we were two ships passing in the night, right? We need to get you here, you need to get there, or do whatever it may be, right? And I think is we have a much more of a closer relationship as a result of the trip, and I hope that continues. And again, I want to be intentional about ensuring that that continues as well. So, yeah, yeah.
Well, Charles, you have so much wisdom from your personal experience and from telling your story all over the place and getting feedback from other folks as well. So, if you had any parting words of wisdom for
Mm.
folks exploring this option, halfway through this option, whatever it might be, what wisdom would you like to share with them?
That's a great question. Um, I think if there's anything that you can take from our conversation today, it's this. I think it's don't wait until life forces you to pause, right? Practice choosing a pause intentionally. I think that's my big piece there. And you don't need to take a year off to change your life. Is the other piece, because at some point you all you do need is the courage to stop living it on default, to be much more intentional about what it is that what it is that you want. Yeah.
I love that. And so this is only a small piece of your wisdom and your
Mm.
story. And if other folks want to hear more of your story, they want to see you speak, they want to invite you to speak, they want to listen to your podcast, where can they find more information about you and how can they get in touch?
Sure. Yeah, so you can find more information about me on my website, charlesachampong.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. You can find me there and also on Instagram at Around the World in Family Days. If you want to learn more about our experience, we wrote a book about our experience around the world in family days, what we learned when we left it all behind and traveled the globe. So I tried to capture as much of our insights and how we did it and what we experienced, and not a book in terms of what we saw and what we ate and all that, but more about the so what as a result of the experience. So diving into a little bit more detail as a result of our experience as a family. So yeah, those are the places that you can find me, and also read about our story through my book as well, Around the World in Family Days.
Amazing. And we will make sure all those links are in the show notes so anybody listening or watching can just click on those and check out and get in touch with you. Charles, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you very much for having me and allowing us to tell our story.